I remember exactly where I was sitting when my wife looked me dead in the eye and told me she needed a month to decide whether she wanted to stay married to me or run off with some other guy. Our kitchen table, 8:30 on a Wednesday night. She had a glass of Pinot in her hand and the kind of expression on her face that people wear when they're about to say something they've rehearsed in the mirror. Calm, measured, like she was about to deliver a presentation at work, not blow up a 14-year marriage. Her name was Carol, Carol Ann Prentice, before she took my last name, Carol Ann Decker after. And she sat across from me in the kitchen we'd remodeled together 3 summers ago, running one finger around the rim of that wine glass like she was trying to summon courage from the bottom of it. And she said, "I need you to hear me out before you react." I set down my fork. "Okay, I've been seeing someone," she said. "His name is Gary. Gary Folsom. I met him at the conference in Columbus back in March." March. It was now late October. 7 months she'd been carrying this. "I'm not in love with him," she continued, which was such an obvious lie that I almost respected her for saying it out loud. "But I have feelings for him, real ones. And I think I need to know what those feelings mean before I can fully commit to us again." I just looked at her. "You need to know what they mean." "Yes." She nodded, like I'd finally understood something complicated. "I need a month. Just a month. To be with him, to see what that life looks like. And then I'll know. Then I can make a real decision." "A real decision," I said. "About us, about our future." She reached across the table like she was going to take my hand, and I pulled it back slow enough that it didn't look like a flinch. "I love you, Ray. I do. I need to be sure, and this is the only way I can be sure." I want to tell you, I said something devastating right then, something that stopped her cold and made her understand exactly what she'd just done. But the truth is, I didn't say anything for a long time. I just sat there with my hands flat on the table, looking at this woman I'd been married to for 14 years, the woman whose name was on my mortgage and my emergency contacts and the beneficiary line of my life insurance. And I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not numb. Quiet. Like the moment right before a storm, when all the birds stop making noise. "So, what exactly are you asking me to do?" I said finally. She looked almost relieved that I was being calm. "Just wait. Give me the month. Don't do anything drastic. Let me figure this out, and then we'll talk." "You want me to sit here and wait while you're sleeping with another man?" She winced. "I wouldn't put it like that." "How would you put it?" "I'd say I'm trying to protect our marriage by being honest with you instead of sneaking around." And there it was. She actually believed that. She actually believed that telling me to my face was some kind of gift. Like the honesty made it better. Like she deserved credit for the courtesy of looking me in the eye while she burned everything down. I picked up my fork again, took a bite of the chicken I'd cooked, chewed it, set the fork back down. "Okay," I said. She blinked. "Okay, take your month." She stared at me for a second, and I could see her recalibrating. She'd expected a fight. She'd expected tears or yelling or begging. She'd braced for it, and I'd given her nothing. And now, she didn't know what to do with that. "Ray, you said you needed to figure this out," I said. "So go figure it out. I'm not going to stand here and beg you to stay." I stood up, picked up my plate, walked it to the sink. "You know where the suitcases are." She left 3 days later, and the second her taillights disappeared down the driveway, I went inside, poured 2 fingers of Jim Beam, sat down at the kitchen table, and started making a list. My name is Ray Decker. I'm 53 years old. I've been an HVAC technician for 26 years. I own a small service company, 4 trucks, 7 employees, decent reputation in a town of about 40,000 people in central Ohio. I'm not rich, I'm not a genius, but I'm patient, I pay attention, and I spent the better part of a decade watching Carol underestimate me, and I'd gotten pretty comfortable with that. She thought she was the smart one in the marriage. Maybe she was in some ways. She had a college degree, a marketing job, a way of talking in meetings that made people feel like they were hearing something important. I fix air conditioners and furnaces. I'm not complicated. But here's the thing about being underestimated by someone for long enough. You stop correcting them. You just let them believe what they believe. And then one day, when it matters, you know exactly where all the cards are and they don't. The first call I made was to my lawyer, Dave Whitfield. Known him since high school, we play cards together on the third Friday of every month. I called him at 9:15 that same night and told him what happened. She actually said that, Dave said. A month to decide? Word for word. He was quiet for a second. Ray, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. Go ahead. Do you want to save this marriage, or do you want to end it? I didn't even have to think about it. End it. Okay, he said. Then come see me tomorrow morning, and we'll start getting your ducks in a row. I was in his office at 8 a.m. The prenuptial agreement was the first thing we talked about. I'd insisted on one before we got married back in 2009. Carol had fought me on it. Not hard, but she'd made a face and said it felt like I was planning for failure. I told her it was just smart. She signed it. She'd probably forgotten it existed by the time we got back from the honeymoon. She was about to remember it. Dave walked me through the whole picture. The prenup was solid. It protected the business. All assets related to Decker HVAC were mine, regardless of what happened. The house was in my name. I'd owned it before we got married. Our joint savings account had about $60,000 in it, which under Ohio law and the terms of the prenup she'd get roughly half of. But that was it. No claim on the business, no claim on the house, no claim on my retirement accounts. She's going to be shocked, Dave said. Good. She might try to contest the prenup. Can she? She can try. But she signed it, it was properly witnessed, and she had independent legal counsel available to her at the time. It'll hold. Then, let her try. The next thing I did was go see my accountant, a woman named Patrice Holden, who'd been doing my business taxes for 11 years. I wanted to make sure every asset tied to the company was documented, current, and clean. If Carol tried to claim the business was marital property despite the prenup, I wanted a paper trail so clear and organized that a first-year law student could follow it. Patrice looked at me over her reading glasses when I explained the situation. How long has this been going on? She told me last Wednesday. And you're already in here. I'm a planner. She almost smiled. Give me a week. I'll have everything organized. The third thing I did was talk to my son. Brendan was 22, living in an apartment across town, working at an auto parts warehouse, while he figured out what he wanted to do with his life. He's a good kid, quiet, like me, thinks before he talks. He and Carol had always had a complicated relationship. She loved him, I believe that. But she had a way of making him feel like he wasn't living up to some standard she'd set in her head, and he'd learned to keep a certain distance from her because of it. I drove over to his place on a Thursday evening, about a week after she left. He opened the door and took one look at my face and said, "What happened?" We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him everything. Not a softened version, not a spared feelings version. The whole thing. The month-long trial. Gary Folsom. The conversation at the kitchen table. Brendan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long moment. "How are you doing?" he said. "I'm okay." "You don't have to say that." "I know." I looked at him. "I'm angry, but I'm clear. Does that make sense?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it does." He looked at his hands. "I always kind of knew she'd do something like this." "What you mean?" "I don't know. She always had this thing. Like she thought she deserved more than she had. Not just with you. With everything." He shook his head. "I'm sorry, Dad." "Don't be sorry. Just, I wanted you to hear it from me." "I appreciate that." He met my eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to." He nodded. "Good." While all this was happening, I was also doing my homework on Gary Folsom. It wasn't hard. The man had a LinkedIn profile and a Facebook page, and a company website, and all three of them told a story that was very different from whatever version Carol had fallen for. Gary Folsom was 46, divorced once, no kids. He ran a small consulting firm out of Columbus, the kind of vague operation where the website is full of words like synergy and scalable solutions, but nobody can quite tell you what the company actually does. He had maybe a dozen LinkedIn connections who were actual colleagues. The rest were just people he'd met at conferences. I dug a little deeper. Nothing illegal about how I did it, just public records, Google, a few phone calls to people who knew people. What I found was that Gary Folsom's consulting firm had filed for an extension on its taxes 2 years running. He had a judgment against him from a former business partner, a civil suit, settled out of court, but the filing was public record. His apartment in Columbus was a rental. His car was leased. This was the man Carol was betting on. This was the upgrade she thought she was getting. I printed everything out and put it in a folder. Not because I planned to use it as ammunition. I didn't need to. I just wanted to have it. I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with. Now, I want to be clear about something. I didn't spend that month moping. I didn't sit in the house feeling sorry for myself, watching the clock, waiting for Carol to come back and make her grand pronouncement. I went to work every day. I had my card game with Dave and the guys. I had dinner with Brendan twice a week. I started sleeping better than I had in years, which probably tells you something about the state of our marriage that I hadn't let myself acknowledge. And I played my role. That part was deliberate. I texted Carol once a week. Nothing heavy, nothing accusatory, just enough to keep her comfortable. Week 1. Hope you're settling in okay. The house is quiet. She wrote back, It's strange being here. I think about you a lot. Thank you for being understanding. Week 2. Had the Hendersons over for dinner. Place feels different without you. She wrote back, I miss it. I miss you. This is harder than I thought it would be. Week 3. Brendan came by. We had a good night. She wrote back, How is he? Tell him I said hi. I hope he doesn't hate me. Week 4, I didn't text at all. I let her sweat. She texted me on day 26. Ray, I'm coming home on Saturday. I've made my decision. I love you. I hope you know that. I read that text standing in my driveway after a long day of work, still in my uniform, smelling like refrigerant and sweat. I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went inside and poured myself a drink and sat down in the living room. I was ready. Carol arrived on a Saturday afternoon just past 2 o'clock. She pulled into the driveway in her Civic, and I watched from the window as she sat in the car for a minute before getting out. Like she was composing herself. Like she was preparing for something. She looked good. She'd done her hair. She was wearing the blue sweater I'd always liked on her. I noticed all of that, and I felt absolutely nothing. She came through the front door, she still had her key, and set her bags down in the entryway. I was sitting on the couch with a glass of bourbon on the coffee table in front of me, and I didn't get up. Ray, she said, Carol. She came into the living room and stood there, and for a second she just looked at me, trying to read me, I think, trying to figure out which version of Ray she was dealing with. Can I sit down? She said. It's still your house for the moment, I said. Sit wherever you want. She sat in the armchair across from me, the same chair she'd sat in 1,000 times. She folded her hands in her lap and took a breath. I've done a lot of thinking, she said, a lot of soul-searching, and I know what I want. Tell me. I want us, she said. I want this marriage. I want you. She leaned forward a little. I know what I put you through, and I know it wasn't fair, and I am so sorry, Ray, genuinely. But I needed to know, and now I know. And what I know is that you are the person I want to be with. You are my home. She said it like she was giving me something, like she was handing me a prize. I picked up my bourbon, took a slow sip, set it back down. I'm glad you know what you want, I said. She smiled, tentative, hopeful. Yeah? Yeah, I nodded. Unfortunately, I know what I want too. The smile stayed on her face for a moment, just from momentum. And then it started to fade as she looked at me and realized something was wrong. Ray. I spent the last month deciding something too, I said. You were deciding whether to pick me or Gary. I was deciding whether to let you come back at all. I picked up the manila envelope from the cushion beside me and held it out toward her. I decided no. She stared at the envelope. Didn't take it. What is that? She said, even though she knew. Divorce papers, already signed on my end. Dave left a space for yours. Her face went through about 6 different things in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, fear, all of it moving across her features like weather. You're not serious, she said. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Ray. She stood up, and her voice had an edge to it now. a sharpness that I recognized from our marriage, the tone she used when she thought I was being unreasonable. Ray, I just told you I chose you. I ended things with Gary. I came home. What more do you want from me? Nothing, I said. That's the point. I don't want anything from you anymore. That's not. She stopped, started again. You can't just. You're upset, okay? I get that. You have every right to be upset, but you can't throw away 14 years because you're angry. I'm not throwing away 14 years, I said. You did that. I'm just acknowledging it. She looked at the envelope again, then back at me. I won't get anything, will I? It wasn't really a question. You'll get half the joint savings account, I said, about $30,000. The prenup covers everything else. The prenup? She said it like she was hearing the word for the first time. You're going to use the prenup against me. I'm going to use the prenup the way prenups are designed to be used. Ray, that's. She pressed her lips together. That's not fair. I almost laughed. I actually came close. Carol, you left our marriage to go spend a month with another man so you could decide which one of us you wanted. And you're telling me what's not fair. She sat back down. The fight went out of her all at once, like air out of a tire. She put her face in her hands, and I could hear her breathing, ragged, uneven, trying not to cry and failing. I made a mistake, she said into her palms. Yes, I said, you did. I can fix it. You can't. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red. Just like that? 14 years and it's just over? You had 14 years, I said. You decided they weren't enough. That's not something I can fix. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Does Brendan know? Yes. What did he say? He was supportive of me. She flinched like I'd slapped her. God! She wiped her face with the back of her hand. God, Ray. You have 3 days to sign those papers, I said, standing up. After that, Dave files regardless. I'd like you out of the house by the end of the week. I'll give you time to get your things organized. She looked up at me from the chair, and I could see it, the full weight of it landing on her. Not just the marriage ending, not just losing me. The whole picture. The house she wouldn't get. The business that was never hers to begin with. The life she'd walked away from, which was not going to be there, waiting for her on the other side of this. Where am I supposed to go? She said. I imagine you'll figure that out, I said. You're resourceful. I walked out of the living room and into the kitchen and stood at the sink, looking out the window at the backyard. And I heard her cry for a while, and I let her. I didn't go back in. I didn't offer comfort. I just stood there looking at the yard until it was quiet. The next morning, she started calling. I was up at 6, had my coffee made, was reading the news on my phone when the first call came in. I watched her name light up the screen and let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Then a text. Ray, please just talk to me. Then another text, 20 minutes later. I know you're awake. Please. I poured a second cup of coffee. By noon, I had 7 missed calls and 11 texts. The texts went from pleading to apologetic to desperate to something that was almost angry before swinging back to desperate again. I read all of them. I didn't respond to any of them. At 2 in the afternoon, she texted, I told Gary it's completely over. I blocked him. I just want you to know that. I put my phone face down on the counter and went back to work. That evening she came over. She'd gotten a room at the extended stay on Route 40, apparently, and rang the doorbell like a guest, which I suppose she was now. I opened the door and looked at her. Can we talk? She said. We can talk, I said. Come in. We sat at the kitchen table again. Same table as the night she told me. Different feeling entirely. She'd brought a peace offering, a box of those shortbread cookies I liked from the bakery downtown. She set them on the table between us like a treaty document. I ended it with Gary, she said. You mentioned. I want you to know that wasn't easy. Not because I love him, she added quickly, but because it was admitting I was wrong. That's hard for me. I know it is, I said, and I am wrong. I was wrong from the beginning. I should never have. She stopped, pressed her hands flat on the table. I got swept up in something. He made me feel exciting, interesting, like I was still, I don't know, like things weren't settled. And now? And now I know that settled isn't a bad thing. Settled is, Ray, settled is what I want. What we had? She looked at me with those eyes, the ones I'd been in love with for 14 years. I want to earn it back, whatever that takes. Counseling, whatever you need. I'll do anything. I looked at her for a long moment. She was telling the truth, or at least she believed she was. She genuinely wanted things to go back to the way they were. She'd made her gamble and it hadn't paid off. And now she was sitting across from me with her shortbread cookies and her red eyes, and she wanted me to pull her back from the edge. And the thing is, part of me understood it. I'm not a monster. I'd loved this woman. Some part of me still did, in the way you love a place you used to live that you know you can never go back to. But that wasn't enough. It hadn't been enough for her when she left, and it wasn't enough for me now. Carol, I said, I believe you're sorry. I genuinely do. Her eyes lit up a little. Then, but sorry doesn't change what happened. Sorry doesn't mean I can trust you again, and I can't build a marriage on a foundation I don't trust. I shook my head. You made your choice. I made mine. That's where we are. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said softly, I thought you'd wait for me. I know you did. I thought you loved me enough to wait. I did love you, I said. But loving someone doesn't mean you let them treat you like a backup plan. I have more respect for myself than that. She looked down at the table, at the cookie box, at her hands. What do I do now? She said. It wasn't really directed at me. It was more like she was thinking out loud. I don't know, I said honestly, but you'll figure it out. You always do. She signed the papers the next day. No more arguments, no more calls. She came by the house while I was at work, let herself in with her key, signed them on the kitchen table, left the key on top of them, and left. Dave filed everything by the end of the week. It took about 4 months to finalize. Ohio's not complicated when there are no minor children and the assets are clearly defined. Carol got her $30,000 from the joint account. She got her car, her personal belongings, her clothes, her furniture from the bedroom, whatever she could reasonably claim as hers. The house stayed mine. The business stayed mine. My retirement accounts stayed mine. She moved into an apartment in Columbus. I heard through mutual friends that she'd tried to reconnect with Gary Folsom, and that Gary Folsom had made it pretty clear he wasn't interested in a full-time relationship with someone who'd just blown up her marriage partly on his account. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but knowing what I knew about Gary Folsom, it tracked. Brendan took the whole thing harder than he let on, I think. Not hard in the sense of being broken up about it. More like processing something he'd seen coming for years and had never wanted to name out loud. He came over a lot those first few months. We'd have dinner, watch whatever game was on, not talk about Carol specifically, but just be present with each other. It helped. More than I expected. About 6 weeks after the papers were filed, he came over on a Sunday afternoon and we were sitting on the back porch with beers, and he said out of nowhere, "You ever think about dating again?" I looked at him. It's been 6 weeks. I know, I'm not saying now, I'm just saying eventually. I don't know, I said honestly. It's been a long time since I've done that. He nodded, took a sip of his beer. My buddy Mike's been using this app. Not one of those swipe left, swipe right things. He glanced at me. It's called singletune.com. He says before you even see anybody's profile, you have to answer all these questions, like what you believe in, what you've been through, what you actually want from your life. And then it matches you based on that, not based on whether you're good looking or close enough in distance or whatever. Huh, I said. Mike said it's mostly people who've been through a divorce or lost someone. People who've done the whole thing and come out the other side and actually know what they want. He shrugged. He met someone. They've been together 4 months. He says it's the most honest relationship he's ever been in. I thought about that. What kind of questions? I don't know exactly. Values stuff. What you regret, what you learned. What you'd never compromise on again. He looked at me sideways. Sounds like the kind of thing you'd actually be good at. I didn't say anything, but I thought about it more than I let on. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March, about 4 months after Carol walked out with her key. Dave called me to let me know, and I went home that evening and sat in the living room for a while just looking at the walls. The house was quiet. Not the bad kind of quiet. Not the hollow, something's missing kind. just quiet, like it was resting. I thought about the last 14 years. The good parts, which were real. The bad parts, which were also real. The slow erosion of something that might have been fixable if either of us had paid more attention to it sooner. I don't know. Maybe it was always going to end here. Maybe Carol was always going to be someone who needed to know what else was out there. And I was always going to be someone who couldn't live with that. I picked up my phone and looked at it for a minute. Thought about what Brendan had said about singletune.com, about answering questions before you see anybody, about matching on what you believe and what you've been through, what you'd never compromise on again. I put the phone down. Not because I wasn't interested, more because it didn't feel like the right night. That night felt like it belonged to something else, to the end of something, not the beginning. But I filed it away. I remembered it. Brendan came over that weekend and we did our usual Sunday thing. I grilled, he brought chips and a six-pack. We sat on the back porch and watched the light change over the yard. At some point he asked how I was doing, really doing, and I told him the truth. Better than I expected, I said. Lighter. He nodded like that made sense. You seem lighter. I think I'd been carrying something for a long time without knowing how heavy it was. He was quiet for a minute. Then, she called me. I looked at him. Carol? Yeah, last week. Wanted to know how you were doing. He took a sip of his beer. I told her you were fine, which is true. What did she say? Not much. She sounded, I don't know, tired. He picked at the label on his bottle. She asked if you'd ever considered talking to her again. What did you tell her? I told her that was up to you, but that I didn't think so. He looked at me. Was that okay? That was exactly right, I said. He nodded. We sat there for a while longer without saying much. The sun went down behind the tree line, and the yard got dark and cool, and it was comfortable. It was just comfortable. A few weeks later, on a Saturday morning with nothing particular to do, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and pulled up singletune.com on my laptop. The sign-up page was simple. No photo upload on the first screen, no location prompt. Just a button that said, Begin your values assessment, and a short paragraph underneath that explained what the site was about. That the algorithm matched people based on compatibility of values and emotional experience, not appearance or proximity. That it was built for people who'd been through something real and come out the other side knowing themselves better than they did before. I clicked the button. The questions weren't what I expected. They weren't what are your hobbies or what are you looking for? They were things like, describe a moment when you compromised something important to you. What did that teach you? And what's one belief you held 10 years ago that you no longer hold and why? And what does trust mean to you and how do you know when you have it? I sat there for about an hour working through them. Some of them I answered quickly. Some of them I sat with for a while, looking out the kitchen window at the backyard, thinking. When I got to the question, what have you learned from your hardest relationship? I typed for probably 15 minutes straight. About Carol, about what I'd let slide for too long, about the difference between loving someone and trusting them, and how I'd confused those two things for years, about what I actually needed from a partner, now that I was clear-eyed enough to say it. When I finished and hit submit, I sat back in my chair and looked at what I'd written. It was the most honest I'd been about my marriage in years, maybe ever. I didn't expect much from the site. I was 53 years old, recently divorced, with grease under my fingernails and a small business and a kid who was still figuring himself out. I wasn't exactly a prize on paper, but I'd answered those questions honestly, and whatever the algorithm did with that, it would have something real to work with. I closed the laptop and finished my coffee. The matches started coming in over the next few days. Not a flood of them. The site was deliberate about it, apparently. You got a few at a time, with compatibility notes that explained the specific values and experiences you shared with each person. No photos until you both indicated mutual interest. Just the notes and whatever the person had written in their own assessment. Most of them were interesting in the way that people are interesting when you see them clearly. A few of them felt like reading something familiar, someone who'd been through a version of what I'd been through and come out with similar conclusions about what they wanted next. I took my time with it. I wasn't in a hurry. That was new for me. Or maybe it was just me finally being honest about the pace I'd always actually wanted to move at. I want to tell you, I met someone right away, and everything clicked, and it was a perfect second act. Maybe that's where this is heading, eventually. But that's not the part of the story I'm telling you right now. What I'm telling you is what happened with Carol. And what happened with Carol was this: she tried to rewrite the story. I heard about it from a few different people over the spring. She'd been telling a version of events where she'd had a crisis of confidence in the marriage, where she'd needed space to figure out who she was, where the whole thing had been some kind of mutual growing pain that just got a little messy. She wasn't a cheater in this version. She was a woman who'd been confused, a woman who'd been brave enough to be honest, a woman who deserved understanding. I heard this from 3 different people in about a 2-week span. The first was my buddy Walt Greer, who I've known since we were both working summers at the grain elevator outside of town when we were 19 years old. Walt called me on a Tuesday night while I was watching a ball game, and he led with, "You're not going to like this," which is never a good start to a phone call. "She's been talking," Walt said. "About what?" "About you, about the divorce, about how the whole thing went down." He paused. "She's telling people you were emotionally unavailable for years, that she tried to get you to go to counseling and you refused, that Danny was just, and I'm quoting here, a symptom of a deeper problem in the marriage that you never wanted to address." I sat with that for a second. "Danny," I said. "On the guy she moved in with for 2 weeks before you threw her out." "That Danny? Yeah. The guy with the maxed out credit cards and the business that's basically a LinkedIn page. One and the same." I leaned back in my recliner and stared at the ceiling for a second. The ball game was still going. Somebody hit a double. The crowd roared. I turned the volume down. "Walt," I said, "did anybody believe her?" He was quiet for just a half second too long. "Walt, look, most people didn't. Most people know you. Most people know what actually happened. But there are a few, the people who only know her side, the people she's been having brunch with. And some of them are nodding along." "Okay," I said. "That's it? Okay. What do you want me to do, Walt? Go around town and argue with her version of events? Call up her brunch friends and set the record straight?" "I don't know, man. I just thought you should know." "I appreciate it," I said. "I really do. But I'm not doing that. I'm not chasing this." Walt was quiet again. Then he said, "You're a more patient man than me." "I'm not patient," I said. "I just know how this ends." She keeps talking. More people hear the story. And eventually somebody who was there, her sister, her mom, somebody, tells the truth. I don't have to do anything. She'll bury herself. He laughed a little at that. "You sound like you've thought about this." "I've had time to think," I said. "Not much else to do when your wife leaves you to go test drive another man." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. The ball game, his truck that needed a new transmission, his daughter who'd just started college. Normal stuff. Good stuff. The kind of conversation that reminds you there's a whole world outside of whatever mess you're currently standing in. After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet for a while. The thing about Carol's version of events was that it was almost clever. She'd taken the one thing that was genuinely true, that I wasn't a perfect husband, that I worked long hours, that I wasn't always emotionally present the way I probably should have been. And she'd used that true thing to build a whole false structure around it, like finding one real brick and using it to fake an entire wall. "Yeah, I worked long hours. I'm a plumber. That's the job. Pipes don't burst on a schedule that's convenient for your marriage." "Yeah, I wasn't always the most talkative guy in the room. I'm from Ohio. We're not a demonstrative people. But did I ever tell her she didn't matter? Did I ever ignore her, belittle her, make her feel small? Did I ever once, in 22 years of marriage, look at another woman and think, maybe I should spend a month sleeping with her before I decide if I want to stay married? No. No, I did not." So she could spin her crisis of confidence story all she wanted. The people who knew me knew the truth. And the people who only knew her version, they'd figure it out eventually. People like Carol always give themselves away. They can't help it. The story keeps shifting. The details keep changing. And sooner or later, even the most loyal friend starts to notice that the narrative doesn't quite hold together. I turned the ball game back up and finished my beer. The second person who told me about Carol's storytelling was her own sister, Diane. Now, Diane and I had always gotten along fine. She was Carol's younger sister by 4 years, quieter than Carol, more straightforward. She'd been at our wedding. She'd been at our house for 100 Sunday dinners. When everything fell apart, I'd figured I'd lose her too, that she'd naturally side with her sister, the way family does. But Diane called me in early April, on a Saturday morning, while I was out in the garage changing the oil on my truck. I had grease on my hands and I almost didn't answer. Glad I did. "I want to apologize," she said, before I could even say hello properly. "For what?" "For not calling sooner, for not—" She stopped, started again. "I know what she did, okay? I know what actually happened. And I've been sitting here, watching her rewrite it for the last few months, and I needed you to know that not everyone is buying it." I set down the oil filter, leaned against the truck. "Diane, you don't have to—" "She told me about Danny before she told you," Diane said. "Did you know that? She called me 2 months before she sat you down at that kitchen table and told me she was in love with him. She asked me what she should do. I told her to end it. I told her she was throwing away a good marriage for a fantasy. She didn't listen. I didn't say anything." "She never listens," Diane said. "She never has. She always thinks she knows better than everyone else. She always thinks she's the smartest person in the room." Her voice had gone flat and tired, the way someone sounds when they're finally saying something they've been holding for a long time. "I love my sister, but what she did to you was wrong. And watching her walk around now acting like she was the victim, it makes me sick." "I appreciate you saying that," I said, and I meant it. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Really?" "Better," I said. "Honestly, better than I expected." "Good," she said. "You deserve better. You always did." We talked for a little while longer. She asked about Kevin. I told her he was good, that he'd been a rock through the whole thing. She said she wasn't surprised. Before she hung up, she said, "If you ever need anything, character witness, someone to tell the truth at a dinner party, you know where I find me." I laughed. First real laugh I'd had in a couple of days. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. After she hung up, I stood there in the garage for a minute, looking at nothing in particular, just the truck, the oil stain on the concrete floor, the old toolbox my dad had given me when I started the business, all these solid, real things. Diane was right. Carol never listened. She'd always been the kind of person who was so sure of her own read on a situation that she stopped taking in any information that contradicted it. That's how she'd ended up where she was. So convinced she was holding all the cards that she never noticed I'd quietly left the table. The third person who told me about Carol's version of events was someone I didn't expect at all. I was at the hardware store on a Wednesday afternoon picking up some PVC fittings for a job I had the next morning, and I ran into Gary Paulson, who I knew vaguely. We'd been at a few of the same neighborhood cookouts over the years. He lived about 6 blocks over, worked in insurance. Nice enough guy, we'd never been close. He stopped me in the plumbing aisle and said, "Hey, I heard about you and Carol." "I'm sorry, man." "Thanks," I said. "I ran into her at the coffee shop last week," he said. "She was with some friends. She came over and said hi, and we talked for a few minutes." He shifted his weight. "She said some stuff about how the marriage had been struggling for a long time, about how it was kind of a mutual thing." I looked at him. I wanted you to know," he said, "because I've met your wife a few times, and I've met you a few times, and the story she was telling didn't quite line up with what I know about you." He shrugged. "I don't know, I just thought you should hear it." "I appreciate it," I said. He nodded. Then, kind of out of nowhere, he said, "My divorce was 3 years ago. Different situation. She didn't cheat. We just fell apart. But the aftermath, the way people take sides, the way the story gets told, that part I know." "It's a lot," I said. "It is." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "You back out there yet? Dating?" I laughed. "Not really. Kevin keeps telling me I should." "Your son?" "Yeah." Gary nodded slowly. "I get that. I was resistant for a long time. My sister actually pushed me toward this app, Singletune.com. You ever hear of it? I shook my head. It's different from the usual stuff, he said. You don't even see profiles at first. You take this long values assessment, like what you actually believe in, what you've been through, what you want from your life going forward. The matching is all based on that. Not pictures, not proximity, just who you actually are. He paused. I was skeptical. I'm 53 years old, I've been married, I've been divorced. I didn't think some app was going to find me anything real, but it was good. I met someone. We've been seeing each other about 8 months now. Yeah, I said. Yeah. He smiled, and it was a real smile, not a sales pitch. Just a man telling me something true. It's not a magic fix. But when you've been through something like this, you don't want to go back to the shallow end of the pool. You want something that starts in a real place. That app, it starts in a real place. I thought about that. Maybe, I said. No rush, he said. Just when you're ready. We said goodbye and I finished picking out my fittings and drove home. I sat in the driveway for a minute before going inside, just thinking about what he'd said. I wasn't ready yet. I knew that. There's a difference between being over something and being ready to start something new. And I was still somewhere in the middle of that distance. But the thing Gary said stuck with me. About not wanting to go back to the shallow end of the pool, about wanting something that starts in a real place. That made sense to me. After 22 years of marriage, after everything that had happened with Carol, the last thing I wanted was to go sit across from some stranger at a restaurant and talk about what we both like to do on weekends. That felt exhausting. That felt like going backwards. What I'd want when I was ready, was something that started with who you actually were, what you'd been through, what you believed in. Not a highlight reel, not a best foot forward performance, just the truth. I went inside and made dinner and didn't think about it again that night. But I didn't forget it either. Carol's campaign to rewrite history ran out of steam around May. I know this because the brunch updates stopped coming through the grapevine, which meant people had either stopped listening or stopped caring. And either way, the effect was the same. She'd been trying to build a narrative, and the narrative hadn't taken. The people who mattered knew the truth. The people who didn't know the truth weren't close enough to matter. What I heard through Diane mostly was that Carol had gotten a job at a marketing firm in the city, about 40 minutes from where we lived. She was renting an apartment with a roommate, at 51 years old, because that's what happens when you blow up a 22-year marriage, and the guy you blew it up for turns out to be a financial disaster. She was starting over. I didn't feel sorry for her. I want to be honest about that. I know the generous thing is to say you wish them well, you hope they find peace, you've moved on, and you don't carry any bitterness. And I'd gotten to a place where I wasn't actively angry anymore. But did I wish her well? Not particularly. She'd made her choices. She was living with them. That seemed right to me. What I did feel, maybe surprisingly, was something close to relief on her behalf. Not for her sake, one for mine. Because as long as Carol was out there struggling, there was a part of me that had to keep track of it, keep score, make sure justice was being served. And now I was tired of keeping score. I wanted to stop counting. I wanted to just live. Kevin had been after me for months to get out of the house more. Not dating necessarily, just out. Go watch a game with somebody. Go fishing. Go do something that isn't work, and then sitting in that recliner, watching baseball alone. He wasn't wrong. I started saying yes to things I'd been saying no to. Walt invited me to a poker night at his place, and I went and lost $40 and had a genuinely good time. An old friend from my early plumbing days, a guy named Pete Alderman who'd moved back to the area after his own divorce a few years back, called and suggested we go to a Friday night high school football game. Not because either of us had kids on the team, just because it was something to do. We went. Sat in the bleachers, drank bad coffee out of paper cups, complained about the officiating. It was exactly what I needed. Pete and I started hanging out regularly after that. He'd been through his own version of what I'd been through. His ex-wife hadn't cheated exactly, but she'd checked out of the marriage years before she left, and the leaving itself had been ugly. He understood the particular exhaustion of it. The way it doesn't just hurt your heart, it hurts your whole sense of what was real. You start looking back at 10 years, 15 years, and wondering which parts were genuine and which parts were performance. I drove myself crazy doing that, Pete told me one night. We were at the bar, not a fancy place, just a neighborhood bar with good beer and a jukebox that still had Tom Petty on it. Trying to figure out when it went wrong, trying to find the moment. Like, if I could just identify the exact turning point, it would all make sense. Did you ever find it? I asked. He shook his head. No. And eventually I realized that was the wrong question. The question isn't when it went wrong. The question is, what do you do now? I drank my beer. That's a better question. It took me about 2 years to figure that out, he said. You're ahead of schedule. I laughed. I had good motivation. She didn't exactly make it hard to be angry. The month-long trial, Pete said. He shook his head. Man, I still can't get over that. She actually said that to you, sitting right across from me at the kitchen table, like she was proposing a business arrangement. And she thought you'd just... What? Wait. She thought I'd wait, I confirmed. She thought she had me that locked up, that I'd sit there like a good dog and she'd come back and pat me on the head and everything would go back to normal. Pete was quiet for a second. Then he said, what does that tell you about how she saw you? It was a good question. I'd thought about it before, but hearing someone else ask it made it land differently. It tells me she didn't see me at all, I said. Not really. She saw a role. She saw a provider, a stable presence, a safety net. But she didn't actually see me. And that's the thing you don't get back, Pete said. Not the marriage. The marriage was already gone. But the feeling of being actually seen by someone, that's what you're rebuilding. I didn't say anything for a minute. When did you get so wise? I said finally. He laughed. Expensive therapy and a lot of bad dates. We stayed at that bar until almost midnight, which is late for two guys in their 50s, on a weeknight, and I drove home feeling better than I had in months. Not fixed, not whole, but better. Moving in the right direction. The summer passed that way, slow and steady. Work, which I've always found grounding. There's something about fixing a real problem with your hands that cuts through whatever noise is in your head. Pete, Walt, Kevin, who came over most Sundays, and we'd grill something and watch whatever game was on. The house, which had felt cavernous and wrong after Carol left, started feeling like mine again. I rearranged some furniture, threw out some things that were hers that she'd never come back for, put up a framed print in the living room that I'd always liked and she'd always vetoed. Small things, but they added up. In August, Kevin started seeing someone. Her name was Patrice. She was a nurse, worked at the same hospital where Kevin did his EMT rotations. She was smart and funny, and she had this way of calling Kevin on his nonsense that I immediately respected. He brought her over for dinner one Sunday, and I liked her right away. After dinner, while Kevin was doing the dishes, Patrice and I sat on the back porch and talked. She was easy to talk to, the kind of person who asks real questions and actually listens to the answers. Kevin told me a little about what happened with his mom, she said. Not prying, just acknowledging. It was a rough year, I said. He said you handled it really well, that you stayed steady for him. He was steady for me too, I said. More than he probably knows. She nodded. He's a good man. You raised a good man. His mother helped with that, I said. Because it was true, and because I'm not the kind of person who erases 22 years of someone's life just because the ending was bad. Carol had been a good mother. That was real. It didn't cancel out what she did, but it was real. Patrice looked at me for a second. That's a generous thing to say. It's just true, I said. We sat there for a while listening to the crickets, and it was comfortable. Easy. The kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled. Before she and Kevin left that night, Patrice stopped at the door and said, Kevin mentioned you haven't really gotten back out there yet. Dating. Not yet, I said. No rush, she said. But when you are, I have a friend. She's a few years younger than you. She's a physical therapist. She went through a divorce about 2 years ago. She's a real person. Good sense of humor. Doesn't take herself too seriously. She paused. I'm not trying to set you up right now. I'm just saying the option exists. I appreciate that, I said. And she's on Singleton, Patrice added. She said it was the first thing that felt real after everything she'd been through. That the values questions they make you answer before you even see anyone. She said it felt like finally being asked the right things. I thought about Gary Paulson in the hardware store. 8 months with someone he'd met there. I'll think about it, I said. And this time, when I said it, I meant it differently than I had before. Not as a polite dismissal, as an actual possibility. Kevin caught my eye on his way out the door and gave me a look that said he'd heard that last part, and he approved. I shook my head at him, and he grinned, and they left. And I stood on the porch for a while after the taillights disappeared, looking at the sky. It was a warm night. Stars out. The kind of August night that makes you feel like things might actually be okay. I went inside and opened my laptop and pulled up singleton.com. I didn't sign up. I wasn't ready for that yet. But I looked at it, read what it said about how the matching worked, the values assessment, the questions about what you believed in, what you'd been through, what you wanted from your life going forward. No photos until later, no swiping, just the real stuff first. I sat with that for a while. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. But I left the tab open. Carol called one more time. This was in September, a Saturday morning, and I almost didn't pick up. I'd been outside pulling weeds from the garden bed along the back fence, a job I'd been putting off for weeks, and my phone was in my back pocket, and I was sweaty and annoyed at the weeds and not in the mood for anything. But I saw her name, and I picked up. I don't know why. Maybe just to have it be over. Hey, she said. Hey. Silence for a second. I heard Kevin is seeing someone, she said. He is. Is she nice? She's great, I said. He's happy. Good, Carol said. That's good. Another pause. How are you? Fine, I said. Good, actually. Good, she said again, then quieter. I heard that you've been going out more, meeting people. I didn't say anything. I'm not calling to make it weird, she said. I wanted to say something, and I keep not saying it, and I thought if I didn't do it now, I never would. I waited. I'm sorry, she said. Not the kind of sorry where I'm hoping you'll say it's okay. I know it's not okay. I know what I did, and I know why it was wrong, and I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back, or I'm not asking for anything. I just needed to say it, that I'm sorry, that I knew what I had, and I threw it away, and I'm sorry. The yard was quiet around me, a bird somewhere in the maple tree, the sound of a lawnmower a few blocks over. Okay, I said. She let out a breath. Okay? Yeah, I said. Okay, I hear you. That's it? What else do you want me to say, Carol? She was quiet. You want me to tell you it's fine, I said, not unkindly. You want absolution, and I'm not going to give you that. Not because I'm still angry, I'm not really, but because it's not mine to give. What you did wasn't just something you did to me. It was something you did to yourself, to Kevin, to the life we built. I can't absolve you of all of that. She didn't say anything for a long moment. No, she said finally. No, I guess you can't. I hope you figure it out, I said. I genuinely mean that. I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for. I just know now that it was never me. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Hard to tell. Goodbye, Carol, I said. Goodbye, she said. I hung up and stood there in the garden for a minute, phone in my hand, looking at the weeds. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and got back to work. That was the last time we spoke. I signed up for singleton.com the following week. Not because of Carol's call. That had nothing to do with it. The timing was just right. I'd been thinking about it since August, since Patrice had mentioned her friend, since Gary Paulson in the hardware store. And one evening I just sat down and did it. The values assessment took me about an hour, longer than I expected. They asked things I hadn't thought about in years, what I believed about loyalty, about forgiveness, about what it meant to build a life with someone. They asked what I'd been through and how it had changed me. They asked what I wanted, not just in a relationship, but from the next chapter of my life. I answered honestly. That was the only way to do it. A few days later, the app showed me some matches, and one of them was a woman named Lois Hartwell, physical therapist, divorced 2 years, lived about 25 minutes away. She had a dry sense of humor that came through even in her written profile. She'd answered one of the values questions about what she'd learned from her hardest experience. And her answer was that I'm tougher than I thought and that I'd rather be alone than settle for less than honest. I read that twice. Then I sent her a message. We met for coffee the following Saturday at a diner about halfway between us. I got there 5 minutes early and sat in a booth by the window and watched the parking lot. And when she walked in, I recognized her immediately. Not because I'd seen her photo, but because she walked like someone who'd decided to stop being afraid. We talked for 3 hours. Not about our exes, not about the divorces, not about all the ways we'd been hurt. Not directly, anyway. We talked about work, about our kids, about what we liked to do when we weren't working. We talked about the town, about a book she'd just read, about whether the diner's pie was actually good or just good by diner standards. We ordered a slice each to settle the argument. It was genuinely good pie. At some point, she said, I almost didn't sign up for that app. I thought it was going to be like all the other ones, and I was so tired of the whole performance of it. What changed your mind? I asked. A friend told me about it, she said. She said it was the first thing that started with a real question instead of a picture. And I thought, yeah, that's what I need. Something that starts real. She looked at me. Was it the same for you? Pretty much, I said. She nodded. I answered those values questions, and I realized halfway through that I hadn't actually thought about what I wanted in a long time. What I actually wanted, not what I thought I was supposed to want. It was uncomfortable, honestly. But good uncomfortable. Yeah, I said, I know what you mean. We sat there for a second, and the diner hummed around us, and it was easy. Just easy. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down, the September air still warm enough to feel good, and I thought about what Pete had said at the bar, that the question isn't when it went wrong. The question is, what do you do now? I thought I was starting to figure that out. I didn't rush anything with Lois. We went for coffee again the next week, and then dinner the week after that, and then a Saturday afternoon at a farmer's market, where she bought too many tomatoes, and I carried them, and neither of us minded. It was slow and it was real, and it was nothing like what I'd had with Carol in the bad years. None of the tension, none of the walking on eggshells, none of the feeling that I was always slightly failing some test I didn't know I was taking. Kevin met her in October. He was careful about it. He asked good questions, watched how she talked to me, watched how she talked to him. Afterward, on his way out, he stopped and said, She's good, Dad. Yeah, I said. Yeah. He nodded. She's real. Real. That was the word. I thought about Carol sitting at that kitchen table with her wine glass, telling me she needed a month to decide between two men like she was weighing vacation packages. I thought about the look on her face when I handed her the divorce papers. I thought about all the months of silence after, the rebuilding, the slow, steady work of becoming someone who wasn't defined by what had been done to him. And I thought about a Saturday afternoon at a farmer's market carrying too many tomatoes, and how something that simple could feel like everything. Carol thought she was choosing between two men. She never understood that both of us had already moved on. That's the thing about people who treat others like options. They're always the last to know when they've been removed from the equation entirely. I don't think about her much anymore. When I do, it's not with anger. It's not even with satisfaction, really. It's just with a kind of quiet understanding of how things work. Some people spend their whole lives convinced they're the smartest person in the room, that they can manage people, that they can keep all their doors open, and never have to commit to any of them. And then, one day, they look up and all the doors are closed. That's not revenge. That's just consequence. I didn't need to ruin Carol. I didn't need to humiliate her, chase her down, or make sure she suffered in ways I could witness. I just needed to stop letting her define the story. Once I did that, once I picked up the pen and started writing my own version, everything else took care of itself. The house is mine. The business is mine. My son is good. My life is good. And somewhere in the next chapter, which is just starting, which is just beginning to take shape, there's a woman with a dry sense of humor who buys too many tomatoes and answers hard questions honestly and walks like someone who decided to stop being afraid. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.